Good morning, dear participants. Welcome back to one more interesting day of learning. May now request our beloved HOD sir, Dr. Indi Prasanna sir, to welcome our distinguished speaker for the session, Dr. Krishna Savani, and do the honors, sir. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Professor Rajesh sir. Very good morning to one and all. So a warm welcome to the five-day online faculty development program with respect to the leadership and the nurturing the leaders for tomorrow. So we have with us the speaker, Dr. Krishna Savani. I have the privilege of welcoming Dr. Krishna Savani, sir. So a brief biography of Krishna Savani goes like this. I have the privilege of welcoming Krishna Savani once again and introducing Krishna Savani to the audience. Krishna Savani is the Provost Chair in Business, Director of Culture Science, Innovation Center, and Associate Professor of Leadership, Management and Organization at Nanyang Business School, Nanyang Technological University, Singapore. He obtained his PhD in psychology from Stanford University and has done a postdoctoral fellowship at Columbia Business School. He has conducted extensive research on the culture, norms, choice, decision-making, lay theories, and policy positions. His research has been published in multiple academic journals, including the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, Psychological Scene, Journal of Applied Psychology, and Organizational Behavior and Human Decision Processes. Dr. Savani has been recognized as a rising star by the Association for the Psychological Science in the year 2015 and was featured in Poets and Quants Top 40 Business Professors Under 40 in the year 2018. He is the one and the only professor at the Nanyang Business School to win the university level Nanyang Assistant Professorship Award and the Nanyang Research Award, Young Investigator Award. He is currently an associate editor at the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology and serves on the editorial board as a member at the Organizational Behavior and Human Decision Process. So we have a leading personality in this area, Dr. Krishna Savani. So over to Dr. Krishna Savani, sir. Please, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for welcoming me here. Good morning to you all. I'm really glad to have this opportunity to share a bit about behavioral science with reference to leadership with all of you participants here. And I've had an old relationship with MSRIT since I think about 2008. I've been conducting research with the Industrial Engineering Department at MSRIT, and I'm glad to be back as part of this program. So let me now share my slides. Okay. So I'll talk a bit about how we can use knowledge from behavioral science research to become better leaders in our day-to-day life. So before we go into the details, let's take a moment to think about what is behavioral science to begin with. So now first, before we answer that question, we need to think about how do we define science? Now, according to the most well-established definitions of science in this field called philosophy of science, is that whenever you are testing hypotheses about how the natural world works, then you are doing science. Right? So, for example, Newton came up with the hypothesis that this is how gravity works. This is the formula for the attraction between two objects. Then he tested it with numerous experiments. Einstein came up with different hypotheses. He's saying, well, the gravity works in a somewhat different way. And he came up with his theory of relativity. And all of these describe how things work in the world. Mostly what natural scientists study is things outside the human world. Behavioral science is essentially doing the same thing, but with respect to human behavior. So how you and I think, feel, and act, that can become the topic of behavioral science as long as we have clear hypotheses about cause and effect that we are testing with research. And this is actually, what the modern field of psychology is about. So when I talk about psychology with most people, they say, oh, you can read my mind. Oh, can you tell what I'm thinking? So this is the psychology of like specific individuals. But that is not what the field is about. The field is about predicting the behavior of the population as a whole. And a key insight is that, human beings are very unpredictable. You cannot predict very accurately how they will think, feel, or act. But that is not a barrier to pursuing behavioral science. Even if you can explain people's behavior to some extent, right? Better than 0%, you can still be in the realm of doing science with respect to human beings. Now, of course, the natural sciences are very old fields. They have at least like 400-500 years of history. But behavioral science is a very new field, like less than 100 years of history. So we have some knowledge, we have some principles, but not to the extent we have in the natural sciences. But hopefully in 500 years, we can predict people's behavior much more accurately than we can predict now. Oh, by the way, if you have any questions at any point, please just either raise your hands or type your question in the chat box. Like I know a whole day just listening to Zoom constantly without any interaction can get very boring. So let's try to not make this a boring session. Please interact and ask questions or share your thoughts whenever you have anything. No need to wait till the end. Yeah. So the goal of this short session is to just get a little insight about how we can use knowledge about behavioral science to be better leaders, better employees, better managers, better policymakers, whatever role you are in your current profession. So now a key development in the behavioral science field came in the last few years when some of you might have heard of this book called Nudge. Now, the idea is the key idea, and the author of this book ended up winning the Nobel Prize in Economics 2 years ago. And a key reason why this book made such a big splash was that it went beyond just accumulating knowledge about people's behavior to saying, how can we use this knowledge to change people's behavior for the better, to be better leaders, so that we can, how can we nudge employees to be more productive, to be more happy with their jobs, so that everyone is in a win-win situation. And once this book came out, many governments recognized the usefulness of behavioral science. So over 10 years ago, when Barack Obama was the US president, he said he created a behavioral science team. He said there's a growing body of evidence that behavioral science insights, which is research from fields such as behavioral economics and psychology about how people make decisions and act on them, can be used to design government policies and to serve people better. Right? So this is, now Obama is a leader, right? But so this is a leader who says, I'm not just going to lead by my own intuition, right? So normally you and I as managers would say, yeah, we have some sense of this is the right way to do things. This is the wrong way to do things. And we just tell our subordinates, just do it this way because I say that's correct. But that's not a scientific leader by any means. And Obama realized that. He said, to be an effective leader, we should use scientific knowledge from behavioral science fields and use them to design policies and procedures. So don't just rely on your intuition or your experience, because that's not scientific knowledge. So just as engineers use knowledge, civil engineers use knowledge of physics and chemistry to design good buildings and bridges that don't break down. They just don't say like, oh, I'll just use my judgment. I'll just go with what I feel like, right? So similarly, if we want to be good leaders and managers, we shouldn't just go with what we feel like, right? We should say, okay, what's the scientific basis of how we make decisions? And the behavioral science field actually took up just about 20 years ago, when a psychologist who conducted a lot of work at the intersection of economics and psychology ended up winning the Nobel Prize. And what I'll share with you today is research that this psychologist conducted in his early work. And yeah, I just mentioned, the second Nobel Prize in behavioral economics went to Richard Thaler a few years ago. I won't have time to cover some of his work today, but I'm happy to share with you later on. Okay, so now think of, when you are making important decisions as leaders or managers or supervisors or head of departments, how do you think, right? Do you think you're like, you evaluate, you check out all of the options, evaluate pros and cons, think very carefully, then say, this looks like the best option, right? This sounds like, I'm sure most of you would say, yeah, that's for important decisions, this is how we do. Now, in contrast, I'm going to argue that a lot of the time, when we make decisions, kind of like this, you're just walking around, going about life, making a lot of decisions here and there. And oftentimes we come across like just like a big wet floor, and we just fall down and just, have a decision-making failure. Now, I would say this guy is lucky, because when he falls down, he'll get a big bump on his head and he'll realize, okay, next time round, I see this wet floor sign, this yellow cone thing, I must be careful. I should not slip again. But unfortunately, our real life is not always all that, doesn't give us so much feedback. So often we make decisions, bad decisions, we fall down, but we don't realize anything. We don't realize that we made a bad decision. So we just continue and continue as we had been doing in the past, and we keep making repeated cycles of bad decisions. So the goal of using behavioral science insights for leadership is to catch this cycle of decision-making errors. So all we want to do is like help people stand on their feet to make better decisions. And you don't need like some new theory or new framework for how to make good decisions. There's already a very clear framework, which is the theories of economics. So economic theory says, if you want to maximize your long-run happiness, or you want to maximize the welfare of your employees or your department or of the university or of your company, this is how you should make decisions. These are some basic principles that you should follow. So all we need to do is just follow the very basic principles of economics. But unfortunately, when human beings like you and I often don't follow even the most basic principles of economics, some of which I'll share with you today. So now let's spend a moment to think about, what counts as a good decision, right? I've been talking about like good decision making for these last 10 minutes. So here are some basic requirements that I would say. One is, a good decision is based on all of the relevant information available, right? If you're deciding whether to participate in this ATAL program, then you need to decide, okay, what's the relevant information? Who is presenting? What are topics will they present on? Is this useful for me? How can I apply it in my work and in my personal life, right? If this is useful, go ahead. If maybe not so useful, maybe no need to sign up. Similarly, this should not be influenced by irrelevant information, right? So irrelevant information could be like my affiliation, right? Or who can, my affiliation doesn't directly influence what I will present, or whether what I will present is actually useful to you. So that's irrelevant information. You should kind of ignore things like that. Now, good decisions are those that are consistent with your goals and preferences, right? You want something, right? You want to achieve something, then your decision should move you towards that, right? If you want to achieve something and the decision is moving opposite, it's clearly bad. The decisions should be consistent with your preferences, right? You like a certain way of doing things. You like certain subject matters. You like certain way of teaching or doing research, right? Then your decision should match those preferences. Very simple point, right? Goal of life is to be happy, to ensure your organization's success. So you should need to make sure that your decisions maximize your long-run happiness, or the long-run viability of the university, or if you're running a company, then the long-run profits of the company. But I would argue that oftentimes we don't even follow even these very basic principles of good decision making, right? So what I just mentioned on the previous slide sounds so obvious. You'd be like, of course, we need to do all this. I would say many times we don't follow even these basic principles. One reason is that, for you to make a decision that is consistent with your goals and preferences, you need to know what are my goals and preferences. I'd say many times people are not even clear on what they want. And if you don't know what you want to achieve, then it's very difficult to make good decisions. Now, all of us are overworked. All of us are tired. All of us are sleep deprived. And because of this, we have often a hard time, when you have a difficult decisions, you need to weigh lots of pros and cons. It's very, very tricky because you're just tired. When you're tired, you just see someone presents you with information, you say, oh, very good, right? So for example, for the ATAL program, there's a brief brochure that was sent out. You look at the brochure, oh, sounds good, right? But maybe to decide whether the program is particularly useful to you, what you might need to do is actually say Google the names of the presenters, see what kind of work they do. Is it relevant to your field of expertise, right? So there's relevant information out there that you need to search and acquire. Sometimes they might, oftentimes you don't search for new options, right? So maybe you're working in a particular university, but maybe you want to move to a different university because of you think there's a better fit. But often we are like, okay, chalo, let's just continue. Everything is going fine. No need to look for new options. But maybe if you check around, try to search what other options are there, you might find something that's a better fit with your preferences and goals. Often when someone gives us information, we just accept it uncritically. So this is a huge problem in the current pandemic. So the WhatsApp in India is just full of misinformation about COVID and about vaccines and about masks and whatnot, right? And so many people are not taking the vaccine because they read some rubbish information in WhatsApp that, oh, this vaccine will give you cancer 2 years later, or it'll make you magnetic, or it'll change your DNA, or it'll lead to autoimmune disease, or all of these other nonsense. So normal, like intelligent decision makers should say, okay, someone is giving you some information, let me verify, right? Is this actually true? Let me see if there's some evidence for it. But so many people in the country just accept information as it comes, uncritically. And that is one reason why we had such a bad outcome in the, so many people died because of COVID. Oftentimes we make quick decisions just based on a gut feeling, right? You're like, oh, I think this is the right decision. I feel this is the right decision. Now, sometimes it might be okay. If you have made a given decision like hundreds of times, then yeah, you have a sense of what's the right thing to do. No need to think too much. But many times, your intuitions or emotions might be wrong. They might give you a false sense of what's the right thing to do. Maybe what's better is to actually, for every option available, write down what are all the pros and cons, right? What's more important? Which factor is more important? Which factor is less important? Do some sort of a weighted average. Right? This sounds like so troublesome. So few of us actually do it, right? Even people who know about this thing. But then as a consequence, if you don't, if you just go with your gut feeling most of the time, a gut feeling is often wrong. And so you end up making suboptimal decisions. Right? So for example, oftentimes we make risky decisions in which the outcome is not clear. Right? Should I hire a given you have a new job opening, you interviewed many people, you're deciding whom to hire. Now that's a risky decision because you don't know how well each of these people will perform. But maybe then what you need to do is, instead of just, I like this person more, or this person went to the same university where I studied. These are not, good predict or the best predictors of employees' job performance. So instead, maybe what you need to do is some sort of expected value calculation. Okay, based on, give a weightage to their education, to their employment experience, to their interview performance, to their skills and knowledge. And you say, okay, each of these is worth, 10%, 20%, 30%, 40%. Give them a score, right? Do I give them like, that person score like 0 out of 100, 50 out of 100, or 100 out of 100, and then do a weighted average. So something of that sort. For options whose returns are spread out over time, right? So you might get some benefit next year, some benefit the year after that. What we need to do is we need to collect at the net present value. So it's a very simple calculation. We do it in the banks do it all the time when giving out loans, but it's also applicable to us. We should be doing expected value calculations when we are considering how much effort are you going to put in a project over 3 to 5 years, or how much benefit are you going to get from a project over many years. And what else could you have done otherwise? What are the opportunity costs for going down this line of action? Okay, so all of this, I think, might sound a bit vague. So let me make it a little concrete by sharing a few specific decision-making insights that are relevant to leadership. So let me now ask you a question. So imagine, you can get to, sorry, I should have changed the currency, right? So imagine there are two options. You can either get, so let's make it 10,000 rupees for sure, or you can take a gamble. You can win 20,000 rupees, you can win 20,000 rupees with 50% probability, or otherwise zero rupees with, sorry, let me just change this. So, okay, 1 minute. Wait. Okay, yes, right. So now let me get a vote. So if these were the two options, how many of you would prefer to receive 1,000 or like 10,000 rupees for sure, right? So maybe you can maybe either answer in the chat or give me like a show of hands, something like that, so I can see what's your preference. No, anyone here? Or is just like a lot of ghosts? say, why take a useless deducted from your monthly salary? Correct. And okay. So now let's spend a moment to think about what does economic theory predict we should choose. So actually, many of you might have seen a graph like this. Here, the x-axis is like the total wealth, right? So just imagine people can't go bankrupt, right? So total wealth is uh, minimum is zero, maximum can, just like whoever richest person on earth, like, I don't know, 100, $200 billion they own, something of that sort. So and the y-axis is like utility or happiness or satisfaction. And what this graph basically shows is, if you have nothing, like you're penniless, you're a beggar with no assets, nothing. The first like 100 rupees, 1,000 rupees you get will make you very happy because you have nothing, right? Oh, now finally I have 1,000 rupees. You to imagine when you were like little children and you had a birthday and someone gave you a birthday gift of 1,000 rupees. You're like, oh wow, 1,000 rupees is so much money, right? Now, of course, now if someone gives you 1,000 rupees, I'm like, okay, that's nice, but not such a big deal, right? Because now you are further along total, you have some total wealth, right? You have been earning, you have a house, you have a car, you have assets. So now 1,000 rupees, it's still nice, but it's not so nice as it was long time ago when you were just a child, when you didn't have any money at that point. Now, similarly, imagine like, Anil Ambani or Mukesh Ambani. Right now, you give Mukesh Ambani 1,000 rupees. You think it'll make him happy? Probably not at all. Zero. Right? Because he's like, I have so much money. What is 1,000 rupees? Like nothing at all. So Mukesh Ambani is very far along this graph, right? So at this later stage, this function is essentially asymptotic, right? It's kind of the tangent to the curve is essentially flat, which means that additional same unit of money additionally doesn't make people so much happy at all. Okay, so is this a reasonable description of how changes in wealth affect your happiness? Everyone agrees? Anyone thinks this is like, disagrees that this is not an accurate characterization? Let's see some responses, please. Okay, thank you, Dr. Vishwas. I'm glad at least one person in the audience thinks that this is a reasonable characterization of how happiness changes with wealth. So actually, this is like a basic assumption of economics. Like it's called expected utility theory. There's no like question at all. They're like, yeah, this is the first thing you learn. Like in a class on microeconomics, like first day, this is what the graph we learn. Oh yes, maybe I can hear Dr. Mohan. You said you don't agree. Maybe you can share your view, please. Maybe I can. Let's see if I can unmute you. Okay, sorry, it's unmuting. I think you cannot unmute yourself, and it's
Sir, I just enabled it. Enabled it now, sir.
Okay.
Yeah, Professor. Actually, this concept I'm not agreeing. See, the
yes,
is not at all related to the any money. Actually, what exactly happens is whatever one point you told that when you are a very small 1,000 rupees may be very great. When you become bigger and bigger, it's a useless something like that. You said it's not give much money meaning. Actually, fact is we are going in the opposite direction of the education. We should not think money will give happiness. Money is required not for happiness. Happiness is totally a concept of different platform. We should not relate this. And another thing is decision should be very bad. Anyway, you should not decide only. You have to choose. Choice you have to make. If I give two ice cream, let's say vanilla and chocolate, you have to choose. You should not decide which one I want. See, you have to choose. Once you choose, you take chocolate. That's it. Whoever, whatever they say, hey, it's my choice. I say, I have it. I enjoyed. No question. Decision you take. There are 1,000 people are there to comment you. What you take a decision is wrong. You become engineer. Suddenly somebody will tell, hey, you have talent to become a manager. Why you took engineering? These are all ridiculous nonsense. Why I am telling this word is because the person should be go on the choice. You have to choose. Once you choose it, what are the plus or minus? He know the tackle, he know the knowledge, he have the full ability, potential to overcome and face it and understand and overcome any issues. This is a way. Actually, I'm not understanding why this facing of the decisions. See, when the critical conditions comes, when a pathetic condition comes, decision will be taken based on your benefit rather than anything else. Or whatever we are in the society, we work for the society development. There is a harmony everywhere. You have to do it. Harmony in the society, harmony self, harmony family, harmony nature. In that sense, if you take the choosing, choice is best option is the what I want to share with you, Professor. You can your views you can put on now.
Yes, excellent point. Thank you for sharing. I really appreciate that someone shared their frank views. So completely agree with you, right? About the second point you said that many people in India, especially, don't just go with say you are good on something, right? You like a particular subject more. You want to study a particular topic because it matches your interest, right? You want to choose it. But many of us don't follow or don't make the choice ourselves, right? We're influenced by parents, friends, family members, society, and we end up in careers that we regret, like we are not good at or we hate that job. So actually, when even from myself, I changed my careers like 3 times. So first, when I joined college, I thought I'll do computer science. It was 2001. So it was like start of that dot-com boom. Everyone was doing computer engineering at that time. Then I took first semester, and then there was one program where I was, there was like very big program. It took like whole week, 2 days to write, and then it kept giving compiling error. And then I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what's the error. After 3 hours, I find out that I missed one semicolon. That's it. And then that made me wonder, right? Is this really what I want to choose? Is this what I want to do the rest of my life, right? Do I want to be spending hours in debugging, identifying minor errors? And then I realized, no, I'm just doing computer science just because of my parents and society. That they say that's the right thing to do, but that's not maybe fitting my interests. And then I switched careers into economics. And then later on, I came across psychology. And then I thought, oh, psychology is more interesting. Then I moved to psychology, right? And yes, I ended up making multiple choices that went against societal points of view. but in the end, at least I'm happy, right? So my utility is maximized. I'm happy with my career and what I'm doing. So actually a good point. So your earlier point was that, money is not even related to happiness. So I think I agree with you, but I would say after some point, right? So if you have no money at all, right? So many people in India don't have enough money to buy food or have a home or have basic safety, to be able to go to the doctor, to pay for the children's education. So which is people at very low levels of wealth. So for them, giving money actually improves their happiness and health. And there's actually economic research. So people have given just like cash benefits to very poor people in Africa, and then looked at their health and education and so on. And they find like just generally positive effects. But of course, after some point, what do you do with more money, right? It just sits in the bank, or you get a better car or better house. But as long as you have a decent enough house or decent enough car, more money doesn't really make you happy. So it basically means, right, you have reached a point where your utility, the shape of your utility curve with increasing wealth is nearly flat. Right? It doesn't change much. And yeah, maybe you don't need to be like Mukesh Ambani to reach that point. Even many of us, right, just some additional money might not make such a difference to our happiness, because our happiness is mostly influenced by many other factors. So yeah, great point. Thanks for sharing. Okay, so let's take this as a basic assumption that at least, at low levels of wealth, each additional unit of wealth brings you more happiness. At high levels of total wealth, each additional unit of money brings you less additional happiness, or zero additional happiness. So now there's some key points about this utility curve. One is that if you notice, the x-axis is total wealth. Okay, so which means that you think of all options in terms of total wealth or total assets. And secondly, in the diminishing, so the graph, right, the concave graph, it indicates what's called diminishing marginal utility. And that is over people's total wealth, not over changes in wealth. So now let us think for a moment, what would just this graph alone, nothing else, no other assumptions. What does it predict about how our happiness will change as a function of, or what does it predict we should choose? Should you choose 1,000 for sure, or should you take a gamble with 50% chance of winning 2,000? Yeah, this is the option. So now, for this, the x-axis you say was total wealth. So we need to assume some total wealth, right? So we can assume any positive number. Let's just assume 2,000 for ease of calculation. Now we know that each additional unit of wealth brings you less happiness. So if you go from 2,000 to 3,000, that'll bring you more happiness than when you go from 3,000 to 4,000, right? Even difference is not very much. It's like slight difference, right? That from 2,000 to 3,000 will make you more happy than 3,000 to 4,000, simply because of that diminishing concave curve. Now, so what this also means is utility of gaining 1,000, twice the utility of gaining 1,000, right? So basically, you go from 2,000 to 3,000, you multiply that by 2, is more than the utility of gaining 2,000. That is going from 2,000 wealth to 4,000 wealth, right? Because that second 1,000 will bring you little less happiness, tiny bit, but still. Yep, I hope everyone agrees. So what this means is, now if I divide both sides of the equation by 2, I get utility of gaining 1,000 is more than half the utility of gaining 2,000. So what this means is, now just in other words, utility of gaining 1,000 for sure is more than the utility of gaining 2,000 with 50% probability. So
small interruption for you.
Please, yeah.
Small interruption for you. See, I have learned in the human values, the prosperity meaning. The prosperity is a feeling of having more than required. See, prosperity is having, see what happened, Ambani, give an example. What he did is, entire money he is putting in his bank account is not distributed. Because of the lack of distribution, poverty is increasing. See, what exactly happening is, if I have 10 shirts, the 10 shirts are sufficient for 1 year. I'm not happy. I'll go for 100 shirts. When 100 shirts I have, how many days I will get to get a chance to give a new shirt, another shirt to wear? This is the issue where the gaining more than the required.
Yes.
And simply, see, even if I get 2,000 more, what exactly I'll do? My friend gets 4,000. I'll be again unhappy. The happiness here is not actually a material to be discussed and taken for telling the money gain as well as the happiness. Because of, so long I have a car which is of one particular value, nobody in the area, if they're all, I'm happy. Next, my neighbor takes 1 inch bigger than my car, I gone. So therefore,
Yes.
this is a totally relative concept of thinking and being in happy state. It is never ever going to be permanent happiness. Continuity of happiness
Yes.
never reaches. So please, I don't know. That's what anybody have to agree. I said no. That's why again I quoted. Don't mistake. I will stop now talking. Please continue. Thank you.
No, very good point, right? So happiness is subjective. So what's a good car? What's a good shirt? What's a how many shirt? What's a good house, right? All of that depends on where are you, right? So what's a good size house in Bangalore is very different from what's a good size house in Mumbai. Because in Mumbai, nobody has bungalows. But whereas in the MSRIT neighborhood, many people have bungalows. Now, many people also have flats. Right? But like in Mumbai, very few people have bungalows. Hardly anyone, only film stars. Everyone has a flat. So then the question, so what's a good house depends on, is relative, right? Like you said. So yeah, very true. Completely agreed. But now, so this is just like, but now just for sake of the problem with like scientific research is that we can only take like one problem at a time, right? So there's research on comparative happiness, but that's like kind of studied bit separately. This work is like ignoring the comparative part. It's just focusing on individual part because people are so complex. It's hard to study everything in like simultaneously in one framework. So what researchers do is kind of, they say, okay, let me pick one small problem. Let me try to solve it. Then let me pick another small problem. Let me try to solve it. And then later on, let me try to combine the two problems. Then I solve the two problems later on. But yeah, I totally agree with you that this is a much more complex problem. We are looking at it from a very specific small angle. But what this analysis, if you just follow the analysis according to that utility diagram on the previous slide, what it tells you is that people will prefer safe options or like more certain, what I call certain options over unsure options, uncertain options in the context of gains, which is, I think, pretty much exactly what the result was. When I asked you, like, among these two options, which would you choose? I think all but one person said, I take the sure option, right? I take 1,000 for sure, exactly as predicted by economic theory. Now let's think a bit about what about the loss question. Would you prefer to lose 1,000 for sure? Or would you prefer to take a gamble? 50% chance of losing 2,000, 50% chance of losing nothing. Okay. So now here again, now let's just start with the same analysis. You assume you have a wealth of 2,000. You recode the options in terms of your total wealth because that's the x-axis of that graph. So the first option becomes, if you lose 1,000 for sure, you're left with 1,000 in your bank account, right? So you have 1,000 for sure in your bank account. Now, according to the second option, if you lose 2,000, you're bankrupt, you have nothing. But if you lose nothing, then you're left with your 2,000. So now these are the choices in terms of your total wealth. Now, does this look familiar? Did we see this before? I think if you remember, just on the previous slide, the options were, would you prefer 1,000 for sure or 50% chance of getting 2,000? So all of you said 1,000 for sure. So now once you recode the option in terms of total wealth, you get the same result. So the options, the loss options convert into gain options. So now once again, you can do the same analysis, right? Utility of, just repeating what I said before. And so what the net conclusion is that even for losses, people should take something that's for sure rather than take the gamble. So think of it this way. Do you think it's, if you are investing, right? Say you invest your funds with in property or in stocks or any other opportunity. Do you think, is it ever a good idea to take additional risk without any additional returns? I think we all will agree it's a bad idea. You should not take additional risk without additional returns. But what the second option here is telling us, right? It's saying 50% chance of losing 2000. So you are taking it, that means additional risk, right? First case, there's no risk. You'll only lose 1000 for sure. So, but are there additional returns? No, because the expected value, right? You multiply 50% by 2000, you get minus 1000. So it's the same. So it's like taking additional risk without additional returns. And economic theory says you should never ever do that. That's not rational decision making. So you should still, everyone should just take, I lose 1000 for sure. Everyone should choose that. That's what economic theory predicts. Right? So in a way, it's like what you're doing is maximizing profits while minimizing variance, right? You don't want a lot of noise. You want like a steady stream of outcomes. Take additional risk only if there are additional returns. Otherwise, never ever take additional risk, right? But actually, when I, both in this session and when I teach this class to MBA students and to executive education participants, the routine finding is this: for gains, vast majority of people choose the safe option. They're like, yeah, I don't want to take a risk. For losses, it's the opposite. Vast majority of people choose the risky option, even though they don't get any additional benefit from taking the risk. So this is basically, it's like gambling, right? You take additional risk without additional returns. This also works, I think, let me just skip the same point, right? So now you might be wondering, right, why does this happen, right? When you talk about losses, why do we become risk-taking, right? What's the explanation? So, what the Nobel Prize winner came up with, he said, people don't have a sense of their total wealth, right? So I think many of us, we don't even know what is our total wealth, right? I don't know what's your house, how much is your house worth, how much is your car worth, how much you have in your bank account. I don't know. Nobody, I think most of us don't even know. So when I give you the option, do you want 1000 for sure or take the gamble? Like you think like, okay, 1000 more compared to now, but you don't think about like, oh, what's my total wealth? And let me add it up. And now let me see how happy I am with that total wealth. We don't do any of that. Instead, what we do is we compare the changes to our current wealth. So current wealth is at the origin of this graph. And we think about, okay, if I get $1,000 or 50,000 rupees, how happy will I feel? And now this curve is very similar to what you saw earlier from the expected utility theory. It's a concave curve, which means more the greater the gains, the greater the total gains, the less incremental happiness it gives you, right? So the first gain gives you more happiness, but the next big chunk of gain gives you a little less happiness. But this graph says for losses, instead of having a concave utility curve, people have a convex utility curve, which means that the first unit of loss hurts a lot. And you're like, I don't want to lose 50,000. Sounds horrible. Hey, next 50,000, yeah, that sounds still bad, but not so bad as the first 50,000. And now because of this reason, many people say, I'd rather take a gamble of losing 1 lakh rupees rather than lose 50,000 for sure. And so this finding explains our the inconsistent the results that we have from this survey, from this session, and from all my previous classes. So this theory is called prospect theory. I think it's like a bad name because it doesn't really convey what it means, but that's what the authors of the theory gave it. Now, some key difference from expected utility theory. So one is that there is no role for total wealth. People don't calculate that. People just consider their current state of wealth. And second, it's not, people don't have diminishing marginal utility from over their total wealth, but they have diminishing marginal utility over changes from their current wealth. And the overall finding is the greater the change from your current wealth, the less of an effect it has. So now for gains, because the utility curve is concave in both expected utility theory and prospect theory, the results are prediction are the same. But for losses, it's the opposite. Key differences, options are not recoded in terms of your total wealth, right? So the disutility or unhappiness of the first 1,000 loss is more than the disutility of the second 1,000 loss. Because, and then you do the same analysis and you come up with people would prefer more risky options over less risky options of the same expected value in the domain of losses, which is exactly what we saw in the survey that I just asked you. When I just asked you, what would you prefer? For the losses, majority of you preferred the gamble, right? 50% chance. This is exactly the prediction of prospect theory. So you see how now prospect theory is essentially a behavioral science theory of how people make risky decisions in the domain of gains and losses. Now, again, we can't predict everyone's behavior. Even for gains, one person chose risky options. Even for losses, a few people chose safe options. So the prospect theory did not predict your behavior, but it predicted the majority behavior very accurately. Right? So that's the state of behavioral science. We can predict behavior fairly accurately, but not 100% accurately. Now, you might be wondering, what does this have to do with leadership? So just wait a moment, I'll come to it in a few slides. Key idea is, if you make good decisions as leaders, if you make rational decisions as leaders, you are a better leader. And even though we are not, none of us are choosing among lotteries in our everyday life, we are making all sorts of choices among risky options that the same principles apply to. So this decision-making bias is called the gain-loss asymmetry. So this happens because, according to economic theory, if you want to make rational decisions, you should take additional risk only if you are getting additional returns. Now, in real life, people take additional risk in the domain of losses even without additional returns. And that's problematic. And the reason, key psychological reason, is that you don't have a small chance of avoiding a loss, because losses hurt so much that even if the small chance is unrealistic, people still want to take it. And again, all of us are rational beings, right? We don't take so much excessive loss, but people who gamble or people who take very risky investments, there are people who throw good money after bad money, they're suffering from this decision-making bias. Unfortunately, many people end up going bankrupt just because of this particular problem. So let me just skip this. It's not so relevant. Now there's some research on how this varies across cultures also. So now across cultures, people's decision making, the pattern of the decision curve, the utility curve is the same, but there's some changes. So there's reason that Chinese are actually more risk-seeking than Americans in the financial domain. And my research finds actually Indians are like just similar to Americans, not very risk-seeking. But in terms of the key reason is that because they have like a bigger social network. So you know that if you make a risk and something goes bad, some friends or family members will help you. And now in India, within certain communities, this is the case. So like a lot of Marwadi business people and Jain business people, the entrepreneurial community often end up taking a lot of risk because they rely on their business network to save them in case their risk turns out badly. Then other communities where people don't have this big financial network, then they are less likely to take risks, and then they are less likely to get into entrepreneurship. But in the social domain, it's the opposite. Actually, Chinese are more risk averse than Americans. Americans are more willing to take risks. And again, in this domain also, Indians are more like Americans, or in which case they don't take a lot of excess risk. or sorry, more like Chinese, where they don't take a lot of risk. So now how should you make decisions, right? So key thing is we should make decisions according to predictions of economic theory if we want to maximize the long run welfare of the organization that we are working for. We should not take additional risk without any additional returns, even if it means taking a loss. Better take a small loss now for sure and stop it than have a risk of either no loss or potentially much bigger loss. Yeah, so I think, okay. Okay, so any other any questions for before I move on to the next point? No? Okay, so let me just move on. So let me ask you some questions, right? So imagine you are the CEO of a company, and there's a decrease in profit, right? Like COVID times, right? Very bad situation, very big loss in demand and business and income. And basically your finance person told you that you need to fire 600 employees so that we can, just maintain our balance sheets. So now there's like two versions. Now you say like, no, I don't want to fire 600 employees. Like, we spent a lot of time training and selecting our employees. And once the economy recovers, what will we do without our employees? So you tell your team, come up with some options, right? I don't want to fire 600 employees. So your team, they do a lot of research, they come up with some two options. So one option is, if you do this, we know for sure, instead of 200 of the planned 600 employees will be retained for sure. Okay. Or alternatively, they say, here's another option. It's more risky. We can take these measures. If everything works out, then there's a 1/3 probability that all 600 people will be retained. But there's a 2/3 probability that no one will be retained. Okay. So let's see, what would you guys prefer? You think it's better to have better to have to save 200, retain 200 employees for sure, or better to take the risk of retaining 1/3 chance of retaining all 600 employees, 2/3 chance retaining no one? Yeah, so maybe you can type your preference in the chat box. Yeah. Yes, I think a couple responses, some more. What would you, what would you prefer, safe option or risky option? Yes, yeah, no, many people are saying retain, but you can't retain all 600. You have to choose one of these two options, right? Of course, ideally, you don't want to retain anyone. Question is, first one, second option, right? That's the thing. Yeah, I know this is bare bones information, and some people are, wondering like, I don't have enough information to make an informed decision. That is true. You don't have enough information because I don't have time to have like big discussion of all the details. So, okay, so of the options given, I think maybe only 1% prefers the risky option. Most people prefer the safe option. Okay, now try to like just forget what I just, forget this question, forget what I just talked about. Think of something else. Imagine your subordinate comes to you and your team comes to you and says, the safe option is 400 of the planned 600 employees will be fired for sure. Alternatively, we can take this choose a risky option. There's a 1/3 probability that no one will be fired. 2/3 probability all 600 will be fired. Which of these two options would you prefer now? Fire 400 for sure, or take the risk option? What would you prefer? Yeah, risky option, yes. Maybe some of you, someone else who hasn't responded yet. Yeah. Okay, risky option, risky option. Okay. Okay, so now, okay, this is data on the chat, right? So when the first question, most people said safe option. Second option, most people said, second version, most people said risky option, right? Okay, let's take, and yeah, this is like the normal finding, right? That when I talk about like, who would you prefer retaining 200 for sure or take the risk? Most people say, no, I want to retain 200 for sure. When I say, do you want to fire 400 for sure or take the risk? Most people say, I want to take the risk. I don't want to fire 400 for sure. Let's go back. Let's just go back. Is there any difference, real difference, between the gain version and the loss version? No, right? Yes, there's no difference because the safe option is 200 of the planned 600 people will be retained, which just means the remaining 400 of the planned 600 people will be fired. It's the same thing. The second option is 1/3 probability all 600 will be retained. Below it says 1/3 probability no one will be fired. 2/3 no one will be retained. 2/3 all 600 will be fired. These are the same options, exactly the same. The only difference is my choice of wording. Did I emphasize the positive side? I'm talking about retaining in the first option, or do I emphasize the negative side? I'm using the word fire in the second option. That's it. And even with exactly the same option, my choice of either positive or negative language ended up changing your preferences. First version, nearly everyone said, I prefer the safe option. Second version, nearly everyone said, I prefer the risky option, even though in reality, there is no difference at all. And the gain version and the loss version are present to you simultaneously on my slides. I think this should be shocking, right? We think we make rational decisions, but even when the same question is just slightly worded slightly differently, our responses are changing dramatically. And again, this is not just you, whole world, whenever this survey is run, get exact same results. So what this means is we as human decision makers are very much influenced by what's called like the framing or just the choice of wording, right? Whether it's positive or negative. So think about it. If you're making an actual decision, you're an actual business, right? You're an actual CEO making a decision. Who chooses the wording of the decision, right? Whether it's firing or retaining. Oftentimes, if you're in a meeting, it's maybe the secretary or administrative assistant who prepared the meeting notes. Maybe they just wrote, oh, here are the options you need to decide by, fire 200 or retain 400 and so on. So whether the secretary ends up choosing the positive wording or the negative wording can end up influencing what you choose. Like, that's just shocking, right? Or it could just be like your subordinate, your colleague, anyone else could have just randomly either stumbled on the gain version or the loss version. And so this is an example of how completely irrelevant change in the wording can influence people's decisions, not just a little bit, but dramatically, right? For the second option, not a single person said, I choose the safe option. Whereas for the gain version, most of you said, I choose the safe option in this chat box here. So what this means is, now again, the reality, the options are the same. What changed here was my choice of what's called a reference point, right? So I chose two different reference points to make the same options look either like gains or like losses. So initially in the gain version, I chose a very low reference point, which you're assuming all employees are fired, gone. Now the options become, they look like gains. One option is retain 200 for sure, compared to firing 600, you have 200 left, or you take a gamble, you can retain all 600, or you retain no one, right? So now the question is about the wording. Because of this assumption of low reference point that everyone is fired, everything looks better than that. So now, we know from before, when making choosing among gains, people prefer the safe option, and this is what most of you prefer. In the second scenario, I chose a high reference point, which is like the status quo, current situation. We have all the employees, all 600 employees are working in the company. Nobody is fired. Now, compared to this high reference point, both options look like losses. So one option is, do you fire 400 for sure? Sounds very bad. Or like take a gamble. There's some chance of firing no one. You can maintain the status quo. Or there's another chance of firing a lot of people. Now, in this case, like, people don't want to fire 400 for sure, because that sounds very bad. And so they say, okay, now I take the risk. What this means is, as leaders, if you want to influence others, right? So, okay, now ideally, let's think of it. As leaders, we want everyone to make informed decision, right? We want everyone to weigh the pros and cons. Maybe what you want to do is, when you prepare the wording of this question, you should have it, make it very clear. 200 of the planned 600 will be retained, 400 will be fired, right? So both the retaining and firing wording are used simultaneously. 1/3 probability 600 will be retained, no one fired. 2/3 probably nobody retained, everyone fired, right? So there could be like a neutral framing that combines the positive and negative aspect that will reduce this bias. So again, as managers, as effective leaders, what you want to do is you want to avoid these changes in wording or framing as influencing your decisions and other people's decisions or the organization's decisions. Right? But sometimes, maybe you think this is the right thing to do, right? You want to convince your boss. You want to convince like some government official. You want to convince your employees. Now, how can you use knowledge of this decision-making principle to actually influence others? Now, and also normally when we try to influence others, we tell them, right, oh, you should do this thing because of all of these benefits, right? Don't do that because like all of these negative aspects. But then the other person knows what you want them to do, and they will say, right, why should I believe you? You have some self-interest. You're trying to make me do what you want me to do. They will react, right? They say, no, I make my own decision. So effective leaders are ones who influence others to do things that they want, even without the other person realizing that you are trying to influence them, right? So the best influence is actually the most subtle influence. The other person has no clue that you are even trying to influence them. So now you can use this knowledge of the framing effect, but it takes a little effort, right? You can't do it automatically. You need to think for a few minutes. So now this whole topic arises when you're comparing options varying in level of riskiness. So you need to first figure out, of the options you want the other person to choose, what's a more safe option, what's a more risky option. Now again, these need not be in terms of money. It could be just subjectively, right? Say you're considering what course to teach next semester. You teach a course that you've already taught before and works out well. That's a safe option. Should you teach a new course in a topic that is of increasing interest, but you don't have much experience? So that's a risky option, right? If you're in a business, you can continue a new project in an area where you have experience, new project in an area where you don't have experience. Do you expand your business in an existing market or in a new market? So there are lots of options of this sort. Now, if you prefer the safe option, you think it's best for the organization to go with the safe thing, then now when do people choose safe option? When they're thinking of gains, right? We know that from the surveys you just answered. So now, how did I make you choose that retain 200 employees for sure? I did it by choosing a very low reference point, like the worst case scenario is the baseline. So now in your decision making, you need to find out what's the low reference point that you can use. Now, next you have to frame all options as gains compared to that low reference point. Not just your preferred option, but all options. That's the most important part. Unfortunately, this is hard, right? Most people want to frame their preferred option as a gain and their dispreferred option as a loss. Not a good idea, because now the other person knows what you want them to choose. Instead, you frame everything as a gains, then the other person has no idea what you want them to choose, because you're kind of framing all of them in positive words. Right? So remember, in the 2 slides ago, I framed both options in terms of retaining. Everything was about gains. Alternatively, you prefer the risky options. When people choose risky options when they're thinking about losses. So to make options look like losses, you need to pick a very high reference point, like the best case scenario, ideal outcome. And then frame all options as losses compared to the ideal outcome, even your preferred option. Right? So that's the tricky part. Now let's make it a little more concrete. Okay, so this is an actual example from one of my friends who was working at in a Bank of America in the San Francisco area. So once I finished college, then I was studied economics, many of my friends ended up in banks, and couple years later, there was this the housing crisis in 2007, right? So my friend was on a mortgage loan. There's a house in which they nearly bank gave $1 million of loans. Owner defaulted, owner couldn't pay back. So the bank now owned the home, and housing prices dropped severely because of the recession. And then after some time, my friend received an offer for 600,000 someone said, I'll buy the house for 600,000. Question is, you sell the house for 600,000 now, or you wait for a better offer in the future, right? Maybe you've already hit the bottom of the housing market, right? Maybe now it'll go up. So maybe 1 year later, you might get much more. Now, it's not just your own decision, right? Because my friend was just like a junior person in the bank. So she needed approval from her boss before she could make a decision on what to do. So think of it, if you want to sell the house, okay, what would you tell your boss? How would you frame the options? So basically the options are sell the house for 6,000 now, or wait for another offer in the future. You want to sell the house. You think it's a good idea, just take 600,000 now, but you want to kind of just very subtly influence your boss without your boss having a clue about what you want them to choose. You don't want to tell your boss, you don't want to reveal your preference to the boss, but instead you want your boss to automatically come up with, propose your preferred option. Okay, what would you say based on what we just learned about the gain loss framing? Does someone have some thoughts? Maybe you could either unmute yourself or just put in chat. And also you can think the other way around, right? Suppose you don't want to sell the home. You think, now, bad idea, right? I don't want to sell it. But you don't want to tell your boss that that's your preference, right? You just want to make it more vague. You just want to frame the options to your boss so that your boss naturally says, no, don't sell. So how can you do it based on the gain loss framing effect that we just learned about? Mhm. Okay, so some people have some options. You tell them if you want to sell the home, you say, well, boss, market is going down. Who knows, it'll get worse in the future. But then your boss can counter argue. Your boss said, no, 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 I think the market has hit the bottom, right? I think it'll only get better in the future. So don't sell. So the problem, yeah, that's I think the key reason. Whenever you provide a preference, right? I think we should do this because of this reason. The other person can counter argue, right? They say no, opposite. How do you decide? Can't decide. You cannot predict when is how the market hit the bottom. You have no idea, right? So is there? Let's just here see this example. Okay. So now imagine you want to selling. So okay, first so think of the procedure we just learned about. First, you need to rank order the options in terms of riskiness. Okay. So selling the house now is the safe option because you'll get 600,000 for sure. It's in the bank. Not selling the house is a risky option. You might get a bigger offer in the future, or you might get a smaller offer in the future. You don't really know. We cannot predict the future. We don't have a crystal ball, right? We are not Jyotish who can predict the future. So now, if you want to sell the house, you prefer the safe option, right? You think, yeah, no, 600,000, just get rid of the stupid house. What you might want to do is you want to frame. Now, when do people choose safe options? They choose safe options when everything looks like gains. So how do you make this thing look like all options? Now, key important is all options must look like gains. So both selling should look like gain and not selling should look like a gain. So how do you do this? Right? Maybe you tell the boss, like, look, boss, we will eventually sell the house. The question is whether we get 600,000 now or we get some other amount later. Okay. So now if you make the statement, do you think a boss will figure out what you want, what you prefer? They have no idea. You are just saying we either get 600,000 now or some other amount later. That's factually correct. You're not saying I prefer this or I prefer that. You're leaving it open. But what you have done is you have framed it as gains. We are either getting 600,000 or we are getting some unsure amount. Now, what do people choose? From what we just learned in the past hour, when choosing among gains, people prefer the safe option, right? So boss will say, yeah, just get 600,000 now for sure. I don't want to take this risk of who knows what we will get in the future. So chances are not 100%, right? But like 80%, 90%, your boss will say, yeah, just sell it. What you have done is you have influenced your boss without even revealing your own preference, without the boss even realizing what you're trying to do. And then there's the flip side. You don't want to sell the house. You think bad idea. But your boss will counter argue, right? So the one way to do it is you can frame both options as losses. For losses, you need like a high reference point. Sorry, this is wrong. This should be high reference point. So you can say, we'll never get the amount that we loaned the house for, right? We put 950,000 on the house. The question is, that's like another reference point, right? That's the value of the mortgage that you loaned out, that the owner defaulted on. Question is, do we take a 350,000 loss for sure now? Or do we wait in the future? We'll have some unknown amount of loss. Okay. Now, people don't like taking losses. So when I gave you the option, like, do you want to fire 400 employees for sure? You're like, no, I don't want to fire 400 employees. So same thing. When the reference point is the original price of the house, you're like, no, our boss will be like, I don't want to take 350,000 loss for sure. I'd rather wait for something in the future. So now naturally, your boss will choose the option that you prefer, even without you revealing your preference. And I hope you realize something like this is much more powerful than directly telling your boss, sell the house or don't sell the house, because at that point, your boss or your coworkers can counter argue. But here with the framing, with the choice of words, there's no counter arguing because both framings are objectively correct, right? You'll get either 600,000 or an unsure amount is correct. You'll either have a loss of 350,000 for sure or an unsure loss is also factually correct. But what we know from before, these small differences end up changing people's decisions. Now, again, these are not just for, again, the housing option is also very like concrete. It's in terms of numbers, right? So, but many decisions in our real life don't have actual numbers, don't have probabilities. They're more subjective in nature. But I would say virtually all options that you are deciding among in real life vary in terms of riskiness, right? So consider this. Imagine you're deciding which of multiple job candidates to hire for a marketing position. So you can either choose, you're considering two candidates. One is from, so NTU is the university where I'm at in Singapore, could either choose a candidate from the business school for the marketing position, or you can choose a student from the School of Arts, Design and Media. So now here, when you think of which option is more safe, which is more risky, I think it's a bit clear, right? Business student more safe. They've taken courses in marketing. There's some idea about what marketing is like. Art student more risky. You have no idea, do they have any business background? Do they have any knowledge of advertising and so on? But, you think there's potential, right? They might bring creativity in. They might revamp your marketing profile and so on. They might kind of give you a cutting edge over your competitors, improve your brand image, but you just don't know. It's more risky. Now, if you prefer the safe option, how do you frame all options to your team members without revealing what you prefer? And also on the other side, you want to prefer the art student. What do you tell your team members without revealing whom you prefer? Some thoughts? Okay, let me give you my solution. So if you prefer the business student, the safe option, what you want to do is you want to frame all options as gains compared to some very low reference point. Right? So maybe one low reference point is like, say, the person that they're replacing, right? Maybe you say like, all of them are great candidates compared to the horrible employee whom we fired. Or you can say, both of these are great candidates compared to all the people we interviewed last week whom we did not like at all. Or you can say, either of these two candidates is better than having no employee at all and all of us having to do the work for this missing employee. Right? So there are many ways to frame all options as gains without revealing whom you prefer. And now and we know that when thinking about gains, people prefer safe option. Just go with the business student. We know what business students are like. But if you prefer the risky option, the art students, then you want to frame all options as losses compared to a high reference point. So one way to do it is, unfortunately, neither of them is as good as the previous employee who quit, right? That employee was just the best person we had for this role. Too bad we cannot replace her. Or something as it, unfortunately, none of these candidates is the perfect employee for this position. None of them meets all of our requirements. They all have their shortcomings. So again, you're not saying, I prefer this, I prefer that, just framing all options as losses. And again, it won't influence for sure, but we know on average, when thinking of losses, people choose the risky option. Say you are the owner of a startup company that has introduced a new fitness wristband in the market. Okay. Now you want to, people to buy your product. What do? So now as a new company, you are a risky option. Right? People don't know you. People know Fitbit and all those other ones, but people haven't heard of your company. So, but you want people to buy your product. So of course you do the normal advertising, these are all the benefits of my product. But actually, We know from this gain-loss asymmetry that people choose risky options when they're thinking about losses, when all options are framed in terms of losses. So maybe what you want to do is you want to highlight all the ways in which all fitness wristbands are don't match very high standards, right? You can say all fitness trackers make some error in measuring your activity level, right? None of them can count exactly how many steps or how many kilometers you walked or what's exactly your blood pressure. Our technology ensures the least amount of error. Okay, so you're focusing on the loss and you're saying choose the risky all options have shortcomings. Instead of taking the other existing market leaders whose loss is known for sure, choose us, our loss is unsure. You know, when thinking of losses, people choose risky options. On the other end, if you're the market leader, you're Fitbit, right? You already know that you are the safe option. Now, people choose safe option when they're thinking about gains. So you need to frame all options as gains. Like all fitness trackers give you a fairly reasonable measure of an activity level. Any fitness tracker is better than no fitness tracker. Ours gives the most accurate results rather than ours gives the least amount of error. Now we are talking about gains and you're like, okay, good, gains, I prefer the safe option. So this is like, you might be wondering, right? So all of this I'm talking, you know, you might maybe, oh, sounds very theoretical, or maybe, yeah, works in like experiments and surveys and so on. Does it work in real life? So here is an example from a former MBA student who was an investment manager at a bank in Singapore. So he made a call to his board. So basically, there's some board that had to decide on that had to approve all major stock purchase or sale decisions. And he told the board that, you know, let's sell the stock. I think the price will drop in the future. We should just cash out. So the outlook of the company is not optimistic. Compared to the peak amount, the stock has already fallen, right? Our profit has decreased. We may lose even more money. And then the board said like, no, don't want to sell, continue holding the stock. And then the price actually continued to drop like he had predicted. So he got very then after, in the middle of this, he took my class. Then he learned about this gain loss framing. He said, okay, let me use it. So then he had another call with the board and he told them, currently, we are still making a profit on this stock compared to our purchase price. But due to the uncertainty in the market or the volatility in this stock, we might or might not enjoy a better return in the future. And now the board said, okay, sell it. What changed? What changed was the framing. That's it. Initially, if you look at the first paragraph here, he said our profit has already diminished compared to the peak time. It's a high reference point. What's the maximum profit we could have earned on this stock if we had sold the stock when it reached its peak, right? So compared to that, selling now is a loss. Now people don't like losses for sure. Waiting the stock out is a more risky option. Thinking about losses, people choose risky option. And similarly, the board said, don't sell, sit with the stock, choose the risky option. Second time round, he changed the reference point from the peak price of the stock. The references point is now the purchase price of the stock, which is very low. And he says, compared to the purchase price, we have a gain for sure. Now, in the future, we might have an uncertain amount of gain. The board said, sell it. I think this is quite striking because it's the same decision, same option, just two different reference points ended up changing the board's decision for a consequential. So this was like a big holding, right? Few hundred thousands of dollars, right? And even for such a big high stakes decision, the framing matters. So I hope this shows you that your simple choice of wording can make a big difference even in real life. Now, of course, Oh, by the way, okay, I think maybe we don't have time for this. Let me just skip that. Yeah, how should you make decisions? So for you yourself, you should realize that this gain loss framing is a trick. It's not a, you shouldn't be susceptible to it. And whenever someone frames options in terms of losses, you need to be very alert that you might have a tendency to take excessive risk more than that is justified. Now, when choosing among gains, people tend to make more rational decisions that are consistent with economic theory. So what you can do is you can actively reframe all options as gains always. Even if in reality it's a loss, think of a very low reference point and compared to that, everything is in a gain. And then chances are you will make a more rational decisions when you're thinking in terms of gains rather than losses. So to be effective leaders, one thing we want to, you want to make a habit. Never take excessive risk, especially when deciding among losses or negative options, right? Oftentimes as managers, we have to choose like which of multiple different, all options are bad options, but we still need to pick one. To make sure don't take excessive risk. And if you want to be effective leader, you want to convert all loss frames or loss wordings into gain frames. And teach your employees, when your employees are said, oh boss, we have a problem, we cannot meet the project deadline, either the option is like, just don't do anything but risk being late on the project, or request like a 1 month extension, which will look bad to the client. Both options are bad options. What should we do? Employee will probably prefer like, don't say anything, just take a risk. But if you want to be an effective leader, maybe you say, no, let's consider frame as gains. That's the worst case scenario, the client cancels the project, right? What are the other options? The client accepts a delay, but requests compensation for the delay, or we make the client, we kind of keep telling the client, you wait 1 more day, or I'll wait 2 more days, I'll get back to you. You keep delaying the client multiple times, right? That's the other option. You might have to renegotiate the terms of the contract. Now, which of these is better? Maybe now it's more clear, like, yeah, it's just better to negotiate a one-time extension for sure at a certain value rather than take this like, few short-term extensions repeatedly, right? So in this way, you can help your subordinates and colleagues and even your supervisors to make better decisions by reframing losses into gains. So before we move on, any questions or thoughts on this topic? No, everything very clear. Okay. So let's move on to one more. Let's move on to another scenario. So imagine you are the CEO of a aircraft manufacturing company. You are considering investing $1 billion into a research project. Now, the purpose is to build a plane that would not be detected by radar. By the way, this scenario is a bit old. I think radar blank planes already exist. Imagine they didn't exist. Okay, but so that's your goal. Now, before you started your project, another firm starts selling a plane that cannot be detected by radar, and the plane is much faster and cheaper than the plane that your company is planning to build. Key question is, should you invest $1 billion in building this radar blank plane? Yes or no? So can you please indicate your preference in the chat box? Let's see what the majority prefers. Yes. Okay. Oh, by the way, if you don't build the plane, you can use $1 billion to build something else that you might be better at, better than your competitors. Yeah, everyone else, if you're around, if you're still listening, what would you prefer? Yeah, your competitor, you have the plan for a project. Your competitor is already selling a better product. Should you build a product that that is guaranteed to be inferior to your competitors, or should you use your investment for something else, your R&D funds? Okay, right now only 3 people answered. There's like 112 people in this session. Can we get some more answers, please? Thank you, Shobha. Hey, 110 people. Is anyone around? It's like right now it looks like I'm just speaking to a lot of black ghosts. Okay, very interesting. So here most people say majority are saying use the $1 billion to build the plane. Ah, nice. That's a good one. Dr. Vishwas says that, you buy your competitor's planes, reverse engineer, and then you build a better plane. Ah, yes. Okay. Okay, very good. So now here's another question. Okay, this version is very close. I just changed the 1 billion to $10 billion. Now what you should do? Should you, and same, everything else is the same, right? Should you build 10 billions to put in the plane? Actually, typically there's no real difference. I just included this version because of some criticism for the survey design. But now let's think about this version. So same initial scenario. When the project is 90% completed, your competitor begins marketing a superior plane that's faster and cheaper. Now you still have $1 billion of research funds left. Question is, should you invest that $1 billion and finish your radar blank plane, or should you use your $1 billion to build something else? Now, what is your preference? Build the plane, not build the plane. Yes, 111 participants. Build the plane, not build the plane. Thank you, Shobha, for responding. Everyone else? Okay, so looks like at least from the response we get, only one person says don't build the plane. Vast majority say build the plane. Whereas at least in the previous question, it was like, little more, many more people said, use the funds for some other purpose, like put it in some other project. And here, like Arijit just mentioned, that, yes, you should invest the $1 billion, because otherwise, if you stop, it means that you have wasted the $9 billion. Right? And that is exactly how most people think of these issues or decisions like this. So here are my results from my actually my normal MBA and executive education surveys. So actually, when you have not done anything, you have not even started the project, typically a majority of the people say do something else, right? If your competitor is already selling a better plane, why make an inferior plane, right? Use your funds for some other idea that's better than your competitor. But once you have already spent 90% on the project, now it's flipped. Now a majority say, build the plane. So it's already in process. We have already spent $9 billion. You must continue and finish. So I hope this is kind of similar to most of your preferences, right? Most of you will agree that this makes sense. But now let's think of it from an economic perspective. Does this pattern of results make sense economically? So actually, according to economic theory, you should choose a course of action, right? So completing the plane or not, or building the plane or not, if the expected revenue is more than the expected future cost. Now, in both the versions, what's the expected future cost? It's exactly $1 billion, right? So you $1 billion out and inferior plane in. Now the expected revenue, we don't know, right? But assuming that your competitor has a better and cheaper plane, kind of expected revenue is not very high. I mean, you might still have some revenue if your competitor plane has a fatal flaw, right? Like the Boeing 737 MAX and the plane just falls down, right? Then clearly everyone will cancel their competitor and go to you. But unless something like that happens, maybe expected revenue not that much, right? And which is why, at least in my past surveys, most people say no, don't build the plane. So that's what economic theory says. But in reality, now, if you look at this, according to economic theory, there's no role for past costs. So whatever money you spent in the past is gone. It's just irrelevant according to economic theory. It should not influence your decisions at all. Zero relevance, zero influence. According to economic theory, all that matters is future outflows, future inflows, like future costs, future benefits. Whatever happened in the past has no role to play, zero. But what happens in real life is that if we have put some time, money, effort, investment in a project, we say we must finish it, even if expected benefits in the future are less than the expected cost. That's a problem. If you want to maximize your well-being, that's not the best idea to take. Or you want to maximize your utility or your organization's profit or revenue and so on. And again, now why do we get this difference? So again, the prospect theory graph that we saw a little while ago explains this finding. So now in the no sunk cost version, you have not started building the plane. The question is $1 billion out, inferior plane in. And in terms of gains, people have this concave utility curve, right? You're like, yeah, sure, inferior plane in, I'll get some benefit, probably not worth $1 billion. So I don't think I should build the plane. But if you've already spent 90% of your of the R&D cost towards the plane, so it's kind of like mentally, right? Your account book is like, yeah, we have this project in the pipeline, right? It's ours, it's there. So canceling the project is like a loss, right? This inferior plane that you had in your product line is now gone. It's no longer there. And giving up hurts, right? We know that losses cause a bigger decrease in utility than an equivalent gain does. Now, this loss of an inferior plane, because it hurts so much, people say, no, I'd rather give up $1 billion and get the inferior plane, not having a loss. But of course, it's like, anyway, it's like throwing good money after bad. I'm sure all of you have heard this phrase. So this decision-making bias is called the sunk cost bias. And this is one of the most prevalent biases of all. Now, sunk cost bias, it basically means aborting a course. This occurs because aborting a course of action, like canceling a project, means mentally acknowledging that past costs, which initially you would think of as investments, now you think of as a loss. And losses hurt. People say like, oh, whatever past costs, sunk costs are like wasted. And so they want to continue this unprofitable course of action simply to associate the negative feeling associated with wasting the investment. And so people end up taking unprofitable risks to even put more investment just in the vague hope of making up for the sunk cost. Now, all of this is, I would say, irrational, because whatever money you have spent in the past is gone. Doesn't matter whether you think of it as an investment or as a cost or as a loss. What you call it is irrelevant, right? In reality, you have spent the money, it's just gone, it's out, right? Doesn't matter whether what name you give it, it's not wasted. because it's spent. Money is investment is spent. And so if you want to make rational decisions, you must always tell yourself, sunk costs are gone. No matter what I do, they'll never come back. What I have in my control is in what I do in the future. And is future revenue, future benefits more than future costs? Then yes, go ahead with the project. If future benefits are less than future costs, then cancel the project. Do something else more profitable. Now, there are lots of examples of sunk cost bias, right? Okay, I think this might not apply. So how many of you have sat in a movie, you went to a movie theater, you started watching a movie, within like 15 minutes, you realize this is the worst movie ever. I absolutely hate it. It's awful. You have to sit up 3 hours of it. I'm like, oh, I don't know how I will sit through this, right? And maybe you are with, maybe if you are with one other person, then it's a little difficult. I leave them alone. But maybe you're with 2, 3 other people, then like, who cares? Now, according to rational decision making, if you have some other better way to spend your time, instead of finishing the movie, you can, do something better. You should just be like, okay, unlike this movie, I'm just going to go. But many of us will, oh, but that will mean I've wasted the amount that I spent for the movie ticket. So you end up watching the whole movie. And then in the end, you are like so angry and upset, like, oh, I just wasted my 3 hours. And now I'm just very annoyed that I wasted so much time. Right? Now, often there are these coupons for restaurants or stores and so on. And then sometimes you buy a coupon and then you realize, oh, that store or restaurant or whatever is very far away, or it's very troublesome to cash the discount. Now, what do? One option is just throw the discount coupon away or give it to someone else, or you go drive all the way like far away, 1 hour traffic, and then you use like a small amount of coupon. And then you're wondering like, wait, was it worth all the time and effort that I spent? Sunk cost bias. Now consider high stakes business decisions. So General Motors, which is, I think still maybe not last year, it's Toyota took over, but until then it's like the car brand that sells the most number of cars in the world. Now, until 2007, they had 8 different brands, sub-brands within them. So one was Chevrolet, which is like this normal regular car. Then there's Cadillac, which is a competitor to BM Mercedes, right? It's like very big, luxurious car. Then they have trucks. Then they have Buick, which is like in between like normal car and luxury car, right? So the middle of the market. Then there is Pontiac, which is a car for sporty people, right? For like young people who want like fast cars with good aerodynamics. Then there is Saturn, which is again like another brand for more sophisticated young people. Hummer is for like, big muscular people, like big fat cars. Then Saab is for like, it's a European brand, Swedish brand. So more for more sophisticated clientele. So now of these 8 brands, how many does GM have right now? Actually, only 4 of them. The last 4 of these brands no longer exist. Now, Pontiac was started in the late 80s. It made a profit for the first couple of years, and then it never made a profit. But GM kept it for, nearly 20 years. Saturn never made a profit, not even initially. Still, GM kept it for nearly 20 years. Hummer made a profit a few years when petrol prices were really cheap. Like in the US, it just cost like $1 for 4 liters of petrol, right? So because this Hummer is like big cars with big engines that consume a lot of petrol. So when the petrol was cheap, people buy Hummer. Then when petrol prices increase, then people stop buying Hummer. So it made a profit for a few years. Saab, GM bought it from the Swedish company in the late 90s, never made a profit. Now you think, right, if a big corporation has all of these loss-making brands, they'll just be like, at some point, like just cancel and get rid of them. But GM never did that. GM only canceled these brands when it was forced into bankruptcy after the financial crisis. And then the US government bailed it out. Then the US government said, I'm not subsidizing your loss-making brands. You need to get rid of these loss-making brands, right? So sunk cost bias can end up having big long-run implications for corporations. And again, this is GM's bad leadership. And there's one reason why they ended up in all of the American car brands ended up in such bad situation was possibly because they were all falling prey to sunk cost bias. But like a Japanese brand, they're more lean, they're more efficient, they're not having sunk cost bias as much. Right? Similar situation with the Airbus 380. When Airbus started developing this big double deck 500 passenger aircraft, they thought, it was for the hub and spoke system. You take people from one location to one hub to another hub, right? And you have like lots of flights between the hubs, like with you need big fat planes. But then very quickly they realized consumers' preferences are changing. People don't want these hub and spoke system. People want direct flights. For direct flights, what you want is smaller, more energy efficient planes. And Boeing realized this, and so they made the Dreamliner and so on, smaller energy efficient planes. Airbus didn't. They made this big fat plane, where even though very quickly they realized that the consumers' preferences are changing, there's less demand for 380, 800, they still kept building it. Only 3 years ago, Airbus declared, we will never forget making a profit. We will not even be able to recuperate the cost that we put in developing 380. And then the COVID kind of just was the death of 380. They're kind of all gone, right? And again, Airbus, if it did not fall prey to the sunk cost bias, would have canceled A380 long time ago and would have saved a lot more money. And instead, even though they spent like $50 billion developing 380, they could save the remaining $30 billion to build a more energy efficient plane, which would have actually sold. So simply finishing a bad project till the end is practically never a good idea. Okay, let me just skip this. Right, so one way in which if you want to convince other people, right? So imagine you have some options of projects, you want people to continue the course of action. What you can do is, people, if you remind people of the sunk cost, they say, no, continue the project, right? And you think this project is worthwhile continuing because the future benefits are more than future loss. Then what you can do is you can emphasize, oh, we spent so much time, money, resources, effort, relationship, goodwill on this project. If you back out now, all of this will be wasted. Do you really want to waste all the effort you put in? Chances are your boss and your teammates will say, I don't want to waste all of this, continue with the project. But alternatively, you think this is like a bad project, future benefits are less than future costs, then what you want to do is highlight the sunk cost bias. So look, whatever time, money, resources we spent is gone. No matter what we do, they'll not come back. We can only focus on the future. Let's not fall prey to the sunk cost bias. Let's maximize future benefits. So as effective leaders, you want to make sure you're not susceptible to sunk cost bias, right? You want to always be future focused, not past focused. Focus on future benefits versus future costs, and train your subordinates to also avoid the sunk cost bias. So I think my time is up. Maybe I can take a couple questions if there are any. If not, I hope you learned, something useful. I feel like rather than talking a lot of vague stuff, I'd rather talk about one or two concrete pieces of information that might be useful to you in your everyday personal and professional lives, both as better leaders and to be better decision makers and better parents and spouses and colleagues and so on. If you'd like to learn more about any of these topics, feel free to send me an email. You can just Google my name and you can come to my website. If you're learning more, I can share some books with you and other materials. I'd be more than happy to, help in any way possible.
Yeah. Participants, may I request you to please post the questions. Hello. So I hope Our speaker has clarified all our participants' doubts. I guess there is one question, framing the question. So there is a question, sir. Framing the question is important. I will write that. So please ask the question. How do you...
Yeah, actually, Dr. Manoj Kumar Gopalya, I think you have a question. Maybe you
Yeah, thank you, sir. I was just waiting for my turn. I just want to know, after hearing it, so initially I thought that you are just training us for tricks, but at the end, in last few slides, you just clarified that as a leader, you should be prepared that you may get tricked. That's the best thing what you said. I just want to know, in that sunk cost bias, maybe you got tricked initially. That may be the most probable reason of falling in that trap. Do you have any experience on that?
Yeah. So, as human beings, I think our always our focus is, right, we whatever we did, we want to feel as useful, right, was a beneficial, that we spent our time in a time and effort for some useful purpose. So just the idea that what we did was a bad decision, it kind of it hurts our self-esteem. You need to say, okay, I made a wrong choice. I should not have started that project. I should have done something else. And you can, we don't like to feel that, we don't want to have like low self-esteem. So many people do like, okay, no, if I just continue, if I just finish it, maybe it will work out. They just be overly excessively optimistic, with the idea of like, okay, maybe you have some chance of feeling good in the future, but it's a very small chance. Most likely things will just get even worse. It's a, like, for example,
it's good. So what I'm trying to ask, do you think being a leader, I might have got tricked at the, what we can say, earlier stage of that project, that may lead to falling in that particular trap and getting into a sunk cost bias? I'm asking that if you have that experience that a leader might have got tricked in the initial phase.
Leader is the same, right?
And that's why the session you take, that you should be prepared for such tricks as well, so that you should make a choice in such a manner that it should not lead to a sunk cost.
Yes. Yeah. So basically, when I teach leaders and managers and, in my normal, education, this is the most common decision-making bias of all, right? So when I ask people to come up with examples of sunk cost bias, everyone can come up with like 5 to 7 examples in like one session. So that's kind of, that's one reason why I brought it up. Like, this is the most common bias. And again, as leaders, but even as in everyday life, right, is the same in all situations. Leaders even more so, because we are accountable to other people. So if we say, okay, I made a bad decision last year to start this project, let's cancel this project, you look bad in the eyes of others. You want to avoid that. And that's why in the leader role, this bias is even more prevalent than it is otherwise.
So one last query, if you allow me. If you're not training a leader, if you're training we can say next to the leader category, we can say it may be a C-suite, but it may not be the final person who is going to take a call. Do you encourage them to trick the leader, or you say them, better don't do that, let you put all the facts in front, and then your leader should take a call? What do you normally prefer?
Yes, so I think depends on how strong of a preference you have, right? So if you think this is really bad for the company, okay, but you know that your leader has a strong tendency to fall prey to sunk cost, then I would just rather, basically, given that we know most people have a strong tendency to fall prey to sunk cost bias, then the best course of action is to just tell people in advance, we continue with this decision only if the future benefits are more than future costs. Let's not fall prey to sunk costs. Highlighting that very explicitly is probably like the best course of action for most situations.
Great. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for this explanation. Totally appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Dr. Vijayalakshmi, did you have a question? Okay, there's Reddy Nayak had a question. why banks take bad decisions to lend money to big people and don't even care for general public, right? Well, I think maybe this question is little outside the topic of what we covered today, but probably bank make bad loans to big people because of political connections and influence, and whereas for general people, then they're evaluating cost benefit ratio and so on. But for like big clients, they are more going by reputation and pressure and maybe some bribe even than than for the general public. But I think maybe that point is a little different from the sunk cost bias.
Yes, sir. Yeah, sir. I think if all our participants are happy with all those questions being answered by our speaker, I know that because it's past midnight for our speaker there, so that's why I'm a little worried. Okay, sir. With this, I think I thank you for having accepting our invitation and being a part of this program.